everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Bright the cheeks and warm the heart, but tread the circle thrice about to keep unwelcome spirits out. Bide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Tonight we're going to be joined by Mark Ireland, and he's the author of The Persistence of the Soul. Now, Mark is a co-founder of Helping Parents Heal, which is an organization that has more than 24,000 members, and it assists bereaved parents worldwide. And he has participated also in mediumship research studies conducted by the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia, and he currently operates a medium certification program. And he's also the author of another book called Soul Shift. Now, everybody knows, you guys in chat, that questions and comments are welcome during the live show. But in order to do that, and you're not in the live chat room, you have to come over and be with us at paraxradionetwork.com. All right, Mark, hi and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Good. And the first thing off the top of my head is the whole title of the book, is The Persistence of the Soul, Mediums, Spirit Visitations, and Afterlife Communications. And persistence, a really good word about that, because some of them really are. Why do you think that's so? Why do they want to be persistent?
I guess if you have a love connection with someone and they pass to the other side, you would appreciate those continuing bonds, I suppose, would be my quick answer to that. Mm-hmm. As far as how the title was developed, it just kind of came to me. I liked it. I put it forth to my publisher, and they didn't try and change it. For the first time ever, I had a book that they didn't try and change the title, but they did come up with the subtitle, which I was fine with.
Yeah, no, because it's interesting because we've had a lot of mediums on and doing readings and things and spirits coming through, and some of them, they will jump in front of the other ones, it's like, okay, I want to be heard. I want to, and it's human nature. And, but some of them just get really persistent. Yeah.
I guess too, it's part of it is the mode by which the communication takes place too. And we can get into that in a little more detail later, but that's one chapter of the book I dedicate really to interviewing 2 mediums to get their take on how they get the information. How does it come to them? Mm-hmm. Because sometimes it's more fragmented, and like if you did have multiple spirits there, you could have overlapping messages or them kind of bouncing back and forth, and I've seen that before.
It can be very confusing, I think, because I've seen that happen too. It's who's talking and who's jumping in and who are you wanting to talk about and talk to. Yeah, and it's pretty interesting, and because as you said, everybody has a different way of communicating and getting there.
Yeah, and I think most of them would say that they don't really control who's going to come through. That's kind of up to spirit. Yeah. They're just the vessel by which the communication takes place. Mm-hmm. Alison Dubois, I just did one of these with her, and she described herself as a secretary, kind of an old school term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I call them, we're the tools, or whatever. By way, it's them actually doing more than we're doing. We're just here. Now, let's talk a minute about your father, who was a prominent 20th century psychic, Dr. Richard Ireland, and it was something that you grew up with in the house. Did you have any interest in the psychic world, and did you want to follow in his footsteps?
Well, I was always proud of my dad, and I liked to show him off to friends and things like that. And but then again, there was a flip side to it because he always knew what was going on in the house, so you couldn't get away with a whole lot either.
There you go.
But I'll give you couple examples.
Sure.
One was, my older brother. He was 10 years older than me, so when he was a teenager, he had somebody buying him beer, and then he was drag racing his car. So my dad stopped those activities. And then further back, when my parents first got married, my mother was trying to become a vegetarian. She'd worked really hard on it for a couple of months, and one day she just had a hankering for a burger, and she went out and got a hamburger. She came back to the house, and that evening, Dad comes back home, and the first words out of his mouth are, "So, Shirley, how'd you enjoy your hamburger today?" So that was kind of like what it was like living there. But, he started out really, I guess it was mainly revealed to my grandmother, his mother, that he had an unusual ability at age 5, at least most prominently. Even before that, she noticed some things. But at the age of 5, he was in the Columbus, Ohio Children's Hospital for corrective surgery on his eyes because he was born cross-eyed. After the surgery, they had his eyes cupped and bandaged. And they actually had tied him to restrain him in a bed because they were afraid he'd mess with the bandages. So this nurse felt sorry for him and asked him if she let him up, would he promise not to take those off? And he agreed. So she went on her rounds, came back only to find him bouncing a ball against the wall and catching it. She thought, oh, my God, he's taken off the bandages. But even more disturbing, he hadn't. So she brought some other doctors in to observe this behavior, and then they put him in her room and tried some tests on him. Like one doctor would stand at the foot of his bed and another in the hallway and say, okay, who's standing in front of you now? And he got it right every time. So that was kind of how it was discovered. At age 12, he questioned some of the, I guess, dogmatic teachings of his church that his folks were going to. And he was a pretty sharp kid at that age. He asked some tough questions. And he kind of went on his own spiritual journey. He stumbled into a spiritualist church at the age of 13 and observed a psychic demonstration with blindfold billet that included mediumship for the first time. He'd ever seen anything like this. And he had just lost his best friend 2 weeks, I think it was, prior to this, who had died in a car accident. And the day that the kid was leaving, they were playing in a creek, and they had these secret code names for each other. And when the kid was leaving, his mother had called him. They were going into town to watch a movie and get dinner. And he says, I'll see you tomorrow, Richard, or Dick, they called him. And my dad said, no, tomorrow you'll be dead. And he didn't mean to say it. It just blurted out, just came out of him. And lo and behold, that came to pass. But fast forward to him going to this church. He's walking in, getting a seat, and the usher said, well, here's a piece of paper for you. Write a question. He goes, well, I don't know what to write. He goes, just if you don't know what to ask, just write a message, please, and then put your name down. So my dad did that. He sent his message up, and this man, this pastor, reverend, whatever, of the spiritualist church was doing the readings. He got my dad's paper and said, Richard Ireland, well, I have a young man in spirit that comes to me, and he gives me a secret name, and the name is Paisy. Well, that's a pretty strange name, and that was the secret code name for the kid. So at that point, my dad was highly intrigued, and this man became his mentor. So fast forward, a short time thereafter, he actually did readings in a spiritualist circle that were highly accurate. And then by the time he was 17, he graduated from high school a year early, and then he kind of went on his own. He ended up getting ordination papers from the NSAC initially, and then he was kind of like a traveling minister and doing demonstrations of mediumship and psychic phenomena in churches around the U.S. And then by 1960, after he had been married to my mom for 4 years, he founded his own interdenominational church, he would call it, that even because the spiritualist church still felt too dogmatic to him and too controlling, he wanted a place where people could come and investigate and kind of go on their own journey and make up their own minds about what their truth was. So it was less dogma and more evidence, I guess. So he was demonstrating these abilities. Later, he went into public venues, secular venues to demonstrate, and that was more the psychic stuff, because that was, at the day, you had to present that as entertainment more, just because of the way the world was. He was on TV. He became a counselor to Mae West, who I got to meet when I was 19 years old. That introduction took place from her previous psychic, Dr. Jack Kelly. When he passed, she was reintroduced to my dad, and he became her counselor, and then he was doing counseling other Hollywood celebrities, and then I believe the Eisenhower family too, because I have a card from Mamie Eisenhower on behalf of the president and her congratulating my dad on them getting married in 1956. So it was a pretty interesting childhood growing up. So I know that's a long answer, but
no, that's
despite all that, I didn't really follow my dad's footsteps, although I do have seen evidence that I've got these abilities to some degree. They're kind of sporadic.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you had any experience when you were a child, and maybe you just kind of ignored it, didn't pay attention.
I think part of the whole thing, and why, how many of us want to be our parent, for one thing.
Yeah.
The other is, I saw, a lot of the crap my dad had to deal with from the kind of debunker type skeptics that were not open-minded or willing to consider the evidence. Yeah. And I thought, do I really want that? And our personalities were quite different. I'm much more practical, and my dad was just more live for the moment, and very gregarious type personality, and I was maybe a little more reserved. But yes, I did have some experiences. I guess one of the first ones was I actually recounted when I was 3 years of age. I recounted some reincarnation experiences to my dad. Which there's a chapter that touches on that in the new book, too. Gets into greater detail about that exchange, which was interesting. But I'd say, I'll give you two more that are more dramatic. One was when I was 18 or 19, I was dating a girl, and I had a dream one night that she was seeing another guy. So I was actually jealous. But what was odd about this dream was I knew his first and last name and his physical description. So that the next day I saw her, and I told her I had this dream, and she says, well, tell me about it. And I'm like, it's just a dream. And she goes, no, tell me. And I said, well, I saw this guy, you were dating him or with him, and made me jealous. But his name was Bob Dooley, and he looked so high. He had this hair color and so on and so forth. And she says, I dated a guy named Bob Dooley that fit that exact description when I lived in Kansas. So that was kind of wacky. More recently, I'd say this is the most recent where it was a really compelling thing. For a 3-year stretch, I'd been invited to go to San Francisco to speak at the Golden Gate Spiritualist Church. And I would always go accompanied by a really good medium, good friend of mine, Tina Powers from Tucson. And this church had been founded in 1924 by a woman named Florence Becker, who, by all accounts, was very similar to my father in her abilities. And before this particular time going there, Tina was hounding me. Hey, Mark, I think you're going to get a message to share with the congregation. Will you share it? And I'm like, sure, Tina, if I get something, I'll share it, kind of doubting whether I would or not. She beat this over my head a number of times, just kept reminding me of it. Even the day walking into the church, she's like, Mark, if you get a message, will you share it? And I'm like, yes, I will. So I was we were about 30 minutes early. I went and sat on a bench to a piano or an organ in their healing room and just tried to quiet my mind, partially just to meditate, but also to kind of prepare for my talk, because I was going to do a talk and Tina was going to give messages to the congregation. So while sitting there, this name pops into my mind. It's Max. I'm like, okay, Max. Then right after that, I got Maxine. I thought, oh, maybe it's Maxine or not Max. Now, I didn't hear them. I didn't see them. It popped in like an idea would come to you, an idea or a memory or something like that. But that's all I got, just those two names. So I went up, I gave my talk, and the place was packed. Tina was a big draw. Whenever they'd have a guest medium, it was always a big draw. But at the end of my talk, I said, well, Tina made me promise that I would share any message I might get. So I have to ask if the names Max or Maxine mean anything to anyone here. And the pastor of the church, his jaw dropped, and he said, well, Max and Maxine were twins born to the church founder, Florence Becker. They were delivered stillborn and grew up in spirit. He says, I think we know who is here right now. And then after the service, he says, I want to show you something. He took me upstairs and showed me a painting that I believe was done by Florence Becker. It was a landscape, and it had a long winding road. He goes, see at the end of that winding road, those two little figures? That's Max and Maxine. He says, that's a secret only known to a couple longtime old church members, but no one else knows about that. So that told me why Tina pushed me, because, I could have easily shrugged it off and said, that's my imagination, or that's meaningless. But yet they were highly significant.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I really do. When you were talking about your dad, I was doing some research just to nose around, and I think it was probably his website, but the Steve Allen Show video.
Yeah, that's the best representation of it that I have, of his psychic demonstration using blindfold billet, and far different than some that do blindfold billet, and some have been questioned because they use a single blindfold, or they might put coins over their eyes before that, which can be bulged out. Right. There's no way you could accuse him of that after seeing what goes on to his face.
Yeah, I know. I kept looking and watching and saying, oh, my God, he's doing more and more and more, Yeah. And
it's
then
10 layers. 10 strips of Johnson & Johnson white medical tape, which is extremely strong adhesive and I believe completely opaque. 3 opaque blindfolds, and then more tape over that, extending down to the cheeks below where the blindfolds end, so no one could accuse him of looking down. So
around the nose and everything. Yeah, and it was and to tell people what he got blindfolded for was they had the audience write down questions or names or something. So he had all these papers in front of him, and he would pick it up, and he could see it in his third eye, maybe. I don't know how you want to call it that way. But he would call the name of the person that had written on the paper, and sure enough, they would stand up, and they were looking dumbfounded. How did they know? So that was really amazing.
Yeah, you could see the emotions were real. I remember the one guy where he asks... he asked if he'd brought a date that night, and he goes, yeah. And he goes, and then he named her, and he says, you didn't write her name on your paper, did you? And he goes, no. So that's a common thing that he would do. I mean, he could give him the information on the paper, but he went far beyond that with predictions, actually, that I know some were validated in terms of pending births and dates of births and all kinds of things like that. And he could give serial numbers off of bills. Yeah. In fact, a man that hired him to work at a place one time, it was a restaurant, nightclub kind of thing, in 1967. Tony DePrima is his name. He's still around. He's a friend of mine now. He had hired my dad to do demonstrations, and he and his co-owners tried to trick my dad on a few occasions. And I think the most compelling thing that they ever did was they took a $20 bill, rolled it up or sealed it in foil, and then put that in a sealed envelope and said, give me the serial number without opening the envelope. And they did that on 3 different occasions, and he was successful. So that's just, that kind of stuff was just every day to me. And that's what I thought it meant to be psychic too. So you could see how part of the reason for not wanting to go down that path is like, I can never be that. That's like beyond normal psychic level stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot there. And it would be difficult anyway, but as we're talking about the fact that you didn't want to follow in his footsteps, there was a tragedy that kind of not only turned your world upside down, but it opened you up to the world that you didn't care much about at one time. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. So as you noted, I took kind of a different path in life. I went to the university, got a 4-year degree, got married at a young age, got into the business world. We had 2 boys. And so I was just kind of focused on the career and the whole, mainstream kind of success thing. Not that I totally discarded my spirituality, but it was definitely backburnered. It wasn't the primary focal point of my life. But it was when my youngest son, Brandon, was 18 years old. One morning, I had been on the road the whole week before. I got back late Friday night. Saturday morning, he mentioned to me that he was going to go on a hike with his buddies to the McDowell Mountains, which was behind our home in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I had this uneasy feeling about it, and even kind of like a premonition feeling. And I asked him not to go, but he's like, "We're going, Dad." He's 18 years old. He figures you're just a worrying father. Mm-hmm. But later that day, we were across town, and I got kind of a distress call from my older son because the boys on the mountain who had been with Brandon noted that Brandon was passing out and having problems. So Stephen was at work at the time, and he asked me if I could jump in and get like a helicopter sent or whatever, because they were way up the mountain. So I did that. We drove back home. By the time we got there, there was, a horde of spectators, a ambulance, a fire truck, and a helicopter. And it didn't take long before they told me that Brandon had passed. Mm. They didn't give me any reason or cause of death or anything like that, but it was a pretty earth-shattering thing. No matter what you know or you think you know or you believe, that sudden separation physically from someone you love and have raised since they were a baby is about the toughest thing I can think of. It's definitely the hardest thing I've ever been through. Yeah. But I did have that background to lean on where some folks just have blind faith, and God bless them, because that's a tough thing. But I had the knowledge from what I'd seen growing up of the spirit contact. But nonetheless, that gave me hope. But at the same time, I still had to deal with the grief. Mm-hmm. But I'll give you a couple of things early on that happened that, were kind of steps getting me back into the field and giving me encouragement and getting me to the point where I am today. I think the first one was just a day or two after I decided I wanted a direct form of connection with Brandon. So I went into a darkened room, which was actually my walk-in closet, turned off the light, sat on the floor, and just with the intention asked for a connection. And within a reasonable period of time, I saw an image of him go by, like my third eye, like my forehead's a projector screen, kind of like my dad described how it worked for him. And it was Brandon's face smiling and in joy, and he was actually glowing. So that made me feel good. But right after that, I saw another symbol coming, and it was a cross with an oval loop at the top. I'd seen people wear those, I'd seen them, but I didn't really know what they were or what they meant. So me being the analytical type, at least to some extent, I had to go Google that afterward, only to find out it's the Ankh, which is the oldest cross of human history, dating back about 5,000 years to the Egyptians, with the lower portion of the cross representing physical life and the oval loop representing eternal life. So I got a coded message, at least that's how I took it, that my son was joyful and he was in eternal life. And had I already known what that meant, I could have said, okay, my subconscious mind just tried to make me feel better. But since I had to look it up, it was more meaningful to me. Yeah. And then on the third day, I talked to my uncle. Now, by this time, my dad had been gone 12 years, but I had an uncle with similar abilities who was still around. And we touched base by cell phone when I was in the mortuary, and he says, hey, Mark, I wanted to let you know something. Last night I tried to connect, but I couldn't get anything. But this morning I made contact. I was in meditation. Your dad came to me. He wanted you to know that he was there for Brandon when Brandon crossed over. Brandon was a little confused at first, but your dad helped him adjust. Brandon wanted you to know you're the best parents he ever could have had, but which is the nice thing we like to hear. But then he gave me evidence. He said, your dad said Brandon's death was caused by a lack of oxygen in his bloodstream that caused his heart to fail. 2 days later, I talked to the physician who had conducted the autopsy, and she told me that Brandon's death was caused by a severe asthma attack that drove down his blood oxygen levels, causing cardiac arrest. So my uncle actually gave me the cause of death 2 days before the autopsy results were revealed to me.
Nice. Yeah, that helps with closure a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that was really the thing that spurred me on, because then I shared that with everyone I knew, whether they wanted to hear it or not. It was very comforting to friends and family. I even shared it with coworkers, and some of them were open and intrigued by it. Others didn't really respond, and they just said, oh, that's not. But then there was a series of synchronicities following that really propelled me down this path. I don't know if you wanted to ask another question or have me dive into that.
No, sure. Go ahead and dive in, because we've got like 6 minutes to the break, so let's fill in. That
should be the perfect amount of time. So 3 weeks after Brandon's passing, I think it was, I was watching the local news on the NBC affiliate in Phoenix, and I saw this piece they were doing on a study at the University of Arizona involving mediums under blinded conditions. They were single blind tests. This first one that I saw actually had Alison Dubois, before the show Medium ever came out. So she was not, a well-known personality at the time. And she had to do a reading for people that she couldn't see directly, and they couldn't converse back and forth. They had a proxy sitter, the researcher, asking her questions, and then she had to answer them pertaining to a deceased person. But I was really intrigued because she was giving a lot of very specific information, and then they did a debrief with the sitters at the end, and it, she had a lot of hits on these specific statements. And I thought, gee, I would really like to get a reading from her. I'd also like to be in that lab someday. And little did I know, both things would come to pass, one sooner than the other. The very next day after seeing this, I get a call from a man in Dallas, Texas, who was a friend of my dad's. His name was Jerry Conser. And Jerry said, hey, Mark, I know what you've been through, and I know someone who might be able to help you. Her name is Allison Dubois, and here's a phone number you can call to get an appointment with her. So I figured that was my dad kind of pulling the strings to help me out and set me on the path. Now, she, even then, even though the show Medium hadn't come out, she was very popular, had a big following, so it took me until August to get the reading with her. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you one of her hits that's pretty cool, and it involved my dad. So 2 weeks before my reading with her, I meet with someone that my dad knew, and he gave me this box, and inside of it was a typed manuscript, 8.5 by 11 pages, called Your Psychic Potential, A Guide to Psychic Development by Dr. Richard Ireland, dated 1973. I'm like, what is this? He goes, well, it's a book of your dad's that was based on all the ESP workshops he did in the late 60s, early 70s. And he gave it to me for safekeeping, because you were out of state at the time, and it was near his time of passing. I said, well, he's been gone 12 years. Why are you giving this to me now? And he goes, I don't know. I just feel like I'm supposed to. 2 weeks later, I have the reading with Allison, and one of the first things she said to me was, well, I have your father here, but he's showing me a book, but I believe it's his book, and it's his book, and he's handing it to you to take forward. Does that make sense to you? And I'm like, yeah, I think I know what that means. And I did later get that book published too.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's it. Did because I think I read somewhere that you went to talk to several mediums also to kind of being able to talk to people. But so if you asked help from other psychics, how do you know? Because this is a question that people are always asking. How do you know the real psychics from the phonies? Because there are probably a handful of good ones and a bushel of not so good ones out there. And you also wrote about that in the book. So what advice would you give somebody if they're looking for somebody that's reputable?
Okay, we probably don't have enough time for me to go into the full thing of this, because I was going to bring up my medium certification program and why it exists.
Okay, well, then we can hold on for a couple of minutes, and I've got other questions.
So I could start and we could just finish on that. I was just going to say.
Okay, as long as it's a 2-minute break, so I'm sure you wouldn't forget. So go for it.
What I've discovered through this is there are some frauds. There are some people trying to take your money. I don't think there are that many, or as many as skeptics would have you think. There are some. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think there are a lot more deluded people that think they have a lot of the ability that really don't than there are frauds. They're just people that think they have a lot of ability and they don't. Mm-hmm. So, you want to get the rarefied air, especially for someone in grief, because it could be very helpful for a grieving person to get a good reading. But a bad reading can set them back in their grief and make them question even more. So, one of the first ways that you can do this is to talk to people who have had a high-quality reading, and make sure that the medium didn't have a chance to really front load, like they wouldn't know a lot about the person. Mm-hmm. Some people will actually have someone else set up the appointment for them, and then they'll buy it as a gift, and then or make it look like that, and then they'll attend the reading. And a lot of the really good meetings, they don't mind. I mean, they're beyond that, needing that to perform well. Mm-hmm. And as far as the medium certification program, I'll give more explanation about that when we come back from break. But what I would say is the reason I started that was because after my first book, Soul Shift, came out, I was inundated with people asking for recommendations of quality mediums. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I knew maybe 6 of them, but a lot of them are well-known, had big followings, long wait lists, and some charged more than some people wanted to pay. Mm-hmm. And in my mind, I thought, there are probably more gifted people out there that are just either unknown or lesser known that can get people in much more quickly. And some of them may be very affordable. And, here it is 9.5 years later, and I found that to be the case. But after we come back from break, I'll expand on what that whole process looks like.
Okay. Well, we will be back, everybody, in 2 minutes. So sit tight and, bye.
There's more Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks right after these important messages.
Hi, it's Tori DeVito. In every family, small conversations can make a big impact. Like when my dad shared his experiences as an alcoholic. Your honesty about that part of your life gave me a sense of integrity that I wanted to uphold in my own life.
I wanted you to know from someone who's been in recovery more than 30 years now that hard work is what creates success, not alcohol or other drugs. I said it a lot, and I'm glad you took it to heart.
Talk, they hear you. For more information, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
Demons, vampires, werewolves, skinwalkers, all of this and more, Sunday nights at midnight on the Staring Into the Abyss radio show. Come, get lost with us.
Hi, this is Marla Brooks from Stirring the Cauldron. One of the best gifts that you can give yourself or to someone else on your Christmas list this holiday season is the gift of insight. And if your crystal ball is a bit murky, think about giving them or yourself a personalized yearly Witch's Oracle deck reading. This comprehensive reading gives you a heads up on what the universe has in store for you in the coming year, and the month-to-month guide offers you a chance to make necessary changes if need be before situations get out of hand, or give you a hint of something really good to look forward to. So if you want to treat yourself or someone else, pop over to marlabrooks.com, click on the More tab on the homepage menu, and then click on Readings to find out more. And have a very happy holiday season, and blessed be.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And my guest is Mark Ireland, and we're talking about his book, The Persistence of the Soul. And before we went to break, we were going to talk about, the
medium certification
program. Yes, I got it.
So as I mentioned, after my first book came out, I had a lot of people looking for a recommendation for a medium. And like I said, the ones I knew at the time, it was a limited number. They were well known and had long wait lists, and some of them charged more than people wanted to pay or could afford. So I started this process back in 2014 to test mediums, and they had to basically, in a nutshell, do readings blinded for someone they didn't know, and they were only given a first name. They couldn't see the person either, at least during the beginning portion of the reading, and generate statistically significant results. And I can describe that in greater detail. But to date, I've certified 41 of them. So there's a wide range of them. They're located not only across the country, but overseas as well, at all price points and, varying levels of ability. Some have performed better than others, but they all, were good enough to pass the standards that were required. And in my bio, you mentioned that I participated in research with some University of Virginia for one, and Dr. Emily Williams Kelly. I got to know a little bit. I participated as a sitter for a test that she did a number of years ago, and I learned more about her protocols. And then Tricia Robertson of the Scottish Society of Psychical Research. She was the president and now former president of that organization. She helped me kind of refine. So I took those two sets of ideas and put them together into a process to test these people, and it's worked pretty well. And what we do is, again, any medium that comes to me, and we have a list now of like 10 waiting to be tested because it's been pretty successful, and we can only test 2 at a time. I have one volunteer that helps me. I'm a volunteer as well. I mean, basically, I do this for free. I don't make anything off of this. It's a public service. I've spent thousands of dollars of my own money to develop the website and maintain it and upgrade it and put new features on it. But additionally, all of my time and my volunteers' time have been donated. But what we do is the mediums that come wanting to be tested, they have to do 5 blinded readings on Zoom with no video for people they don't know. Those readings are recorded, and then the sitter on the other end is responsible for transcribing that reading and then grading it, because they're the only one that knows what statements are correct or incorrect and so forth. So they really have to break things into individual statements that can be graded as correct, incorrect, or indeterminable. Indeterminable would be kind of like somebody making a prediction about something that hasn't happened yet, so you really can't grade it yet. Mm-hmm. Or maybe a reference to something the deceased person's trying to convey, but it would require the sitter to make contact with someone they don't know or someone overseas or something like that, where they just can't find out if it's correct or not. Mm-hmm. They also can award bonus points if there's a very strong hit that's highly significant. And there's 2 levels of bonus points. There's a 2-point and a 5-point. So just to give you a flavor for the difference, if a medium were to say, I believe I have your son here who's passed. I think his name starts with an A, and I think he liked pizza. So then the sitter would say, okay, yeah, I did have a son pass. His name was Aaron, so you got a letter A. That's pretty good. I'll give you a 2-point bonus for that. You didn't get the name, but you got the A. And pizza, yeah, that was his favorite food. I'll give you 2 points for that. So, but let's say that the medium actually said, okay, I have your son here who passed. His name was Aaron, and I think his favorite food was pizza with pepperonis and black olives and onion. Now that's getting real specific. Well, then the sitter is going to say, okay, those 3 statements are correct, and I'm going to give 5-point bonuses to those 2 things. So that's how the scoring works. And if something's incorrect, it's pretty obvious. It's going to be marked as incorrect. The indeterminable statements are set to the side because we really can't grade those. However, if a medium has more than 33% of the statements as indeterminable, anything over that we grade as incorrect, because that would be an inordinate number and not a very evidential reading. So at the end of the day, to pass, someone has to have a score of at least 75. Part of the scoring is made up of the percent of accuracy. So you have to have a minimum 65% accuracy, and that 65% would equate to 65 points. So someone just passed the accuracy portion requirement of 65, they would have to have at least 10 bonus points to get to the 75 to pass. Or if they were 75% accurate or higher, they would pass. But they have to do that over 5 readings, because what you'll find is in the course of 5 readings, you may get, someone who's just a pretty good medium might have, 1 outstanding one, 2 really good ones, 1 that's okay, and maybe they bomb once. Mm-hmm. So you need that overall result. And that's really how it works. And again, I've had some people score well into the mid to high 90s with that methodology that have done great. I've had a few people just barely get over, but a lot of them are in the middle. But we have 41 people on the list now. And, in all this time, 9 years, I've only had 1 email from somebody who wrote to me to complain that they didn't get a good reading. And I'm sure there were more, but they just didn't reach out to me. And most of these meetings, all these meetings are high integrity people. So most of them, if not all of them, I'm sure would provide a refund if they don't have a good session.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. I want to jump into something. In the book, you have personal stories about what's going on with you, and you also have scientific chapters. And so let's talk a little bit about the scientific part, because I'm sure that maybe 1 or 2 people listening in are mumbling under their breath, speaking that spirits and ghosts in general cannot be verified if, any kind of scientific experiment one way or the other. So let's talk about that, because, I mean, what kind of scientific experiments were done to obtain some of the evidence, and let's hear some of the compelling evidence that was found kind of to make it true.
Well, first off, the book was structured in a unique way in that I tried to incorporate personal experiences and things I had seen and gone through, along with supportive evidence from science and from history and other things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of two books in one. And some people who already are believers will just want to read the personal stories. They don't want to get into deep science. Others are going to be more on the analytical side, or be open-minded skeptics are going to want to read that validating information, and some read it all. Yeah. So I would just say that there's evidence actually going back to like 1850, but the most formalized stuff goes back to 1882 with the founding of the Society of Psychical Research, and a number of the tests and initiatives they did with a number of mediums under controlled conditions. But really the best evidence to this very day has to do with some experiments that happened involving one member of the Society of Psychical Research who had passed. And then these various mediums from around the world started getting these messages that were fragmentary. They were not complete messages, and they didn't make sense on their own. And but when brought together, they formed a mosaic and a very detailed, deep message that conveyed the idea that there was an intelligence behind that. And they did a lot of other tests and things. I'd say more recently, you have like Dr. Julie Beischel at the Windbridge Research Center has done extensive testing under mediums under quintuple blinded conditions. Now, and she's generated results that are way beyond chance, and documented that it's been demonstrated that these people have the capability of delivering clear information pertaining to discarnate individuals without any knowledge or any sensory input. That's been documented and proven. Where you're going to get into, questions from some people who are materialists, and a lot of people in science, they've been raised with materialism as the foundation of their worldview, or also called physicalism. And that purports that matter comes first, and, consciousness is generated by the brain. So if you adopt that kind of thinking, then, there could be no survival after death, because when the brain dies, the consciousness goes. So what we're talking about is the idea that consciousness is primary, which is something that scientists like Bernardo Kastrup would subscribe to. And a lot of the early researchers in the field of quantum mechanics, like Max Planck, they were idealists. They believed in idealism, that consciousness is primary and matter is a byproduct of consciousness. It produced matter out of whatever, Mm-hmm. But that's how consciousness could continue, because it's primary and matter is second. So our bodies die, but there's a part of us, the conscious entity, that operates through this brain, which is a reducer of consciousness to help us function in this world and survive. It's not really the way that the materialist model works. And that's where you get stuck with a lot of these folks, because, even ones that might believe in psychic phenomena, they might think, well, that could just be telepathy with somebody, or, or that could be just, they might believe in clairvoyance, but not understand it. And there's no theory. That's the other thing too. They would say, you have no theory to explain the mechanism for how it works, so we can't really take it as serious science. Well, you're never going to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. There is, if consciousness is primary, it's always going to be trying to come through and break through. So there's research out there. The Scottish Society of Psychical Research, my friend Tricia Robertson, her and an esteemed scientist named Professor Archie Roy, who's now deceased, they did some extensive studies. And there's a couple videos that would explain this. If people wanted to Google it, it's called The Psychic Barber. It's a feature that's focused on Scottish medium Gordon Smith, who's one of the top in the world. I've met him. He's great. But the part 2 of that, it shows the experimentation that was done And I've got details about that in the book, too. So the book really gets into more depth on these things and gives specific examples of various studies and things that were done over the years. So I'm just giving a high-level overview of it. I would just say that the science has been done. It's very compelling. But if somebody's not open to it, and in most cases, a lot of folks that put down this whole field and psychic phenomena in general have never read the evidence, have never read the research. So I would encourage them to look into that. You could start with my book because I tell you where to go to look for it. I give you a high-level overview of what that information looks like.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in the book, and like I said earlier with you, we're not going to get in. Not enough time to get it all in.
60 minutes.
Yeah, it goes really quick. But you just mentioned your book, Soul Shift, and the subhead is Finding Where the Dead Go. Now, you can either answer that question, where did they go, quickly, or come back and down the line and we'll do the whole story, a whole show about that.
We can, although all I can give you is my rough understanding and my speculation on that.
Well,
and I would say that subtitle actually came from my publisher, Richard Grossinger. It was funny because he wanted to use a more ghoulish title, Ghost Souls Finding the Dead. And I thought, no, that is not at all what I want. And so I went to bed one night and I woke up about 4 a.m. and it just came to me, Soul Shift. And so I gave him that. He goes, okay, we'll do Soul Shift. And I said, can we change that subtitle? He goes, okay, well, how about Finding Where the Dead Go? I said, okay, we can do that. And I do have feelings about that topic, and I'd be happy to come back on another time to dive into that.
Okay, we'll do that. But in the meantime, we still have a few minutes, and I'm just jumping at things. What are the 5 pillars of healing? Because everybody needs to know that.
Okay. Well, as you'd mentioned early on, I co-founded an organization called Helping Parents Heal. And really, it came about because of a couple things. First off, I was doing a workshop back after Soul Shift came out, and we had a break, and a woman came up to me, a medium named Suzanne Wilson. I'd never met her before, and she said she just moved from Florida to Arizona, and she came to that to make acquaintance with people, like-minded people. She told me she was a medium, and then she actually gave me a couple psychic hits just to kind of prove it, I guess. And then she says, it's interesting that your son died on a mountain because I just met another woman whose son died on a mountain. Although it was in the Himalayas, her son was on a university trip to Mount Everest, and they went up the mountain too fast and he died of altitude sickness. So I said, would you give her a copy of my book and my contact information? I'm just hoping that could maybe help her. She said, sure. It wasn't a day or two later, I get a call from this woman, Elizabeth Boyson, and she's like, I read your book in one sitting. I want to meet you and your wife. When can we get together? So it wasn't long after that we sat down and met, and she told me that she had formed a group, one local group called Parents United and Lost. And she says, I'm going to have my first ever, it was a Facebook group at the time. She goes, I'm going to have my first ever in-person meeting. Would you be my inaugural speaker? And I said, sure. So a couple weeks later, I go and I talk at this meeting, and it worked really well. We had 30 to 40 people. Elizabeth starts doing these meetings on a regular basis. And I go to some of them. I can't make them all. And then fast forward to like late 2011, I was leaving the corporate job trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And Tina Powers, the medium friend I mentioned earlier, she told me, she says, Mark, I think your real calling in life is to help other parents who've been through the same thing as you. And I think you might want to consider forming an organization to do that. And then I thought, okay, that's a good idea. I thought, well, actually, Elizabeth's already got one, but it's only one group in one location. What if we blueprinted what she did and take it out and see if other affiliates want to start doing those meetings? Also, she doesn't have a newsletter or a website, so I could help her put those things together. So I call Elizabeth. I say, hey, would you want to partner with me to do this and blow this thing out? And maybe change the name to something like Helping Parents Heal. She goes, I'd love that. I love that name way better than the one I had. So that was really the start of it. And now we actually have 26,000 members worldwide, 175 affiliate chapters. We have a conference every other year. The next one's in 24. It'll be in Phoenix. It'll draw 1,000 people. It's the hotel capacity. And it's an extremely healing event. But where I was going with all this is the 5 pillars of healing. came about because of what I observed from the people who came in to our meetings and our organization, and how they came in versus how they left or how they progressed over time. And the reason our organization even exists is because there are other groups for bereaved parents, but they don't allow the discussion of spiritual experiences or afterlife evidence. And that's a core piece of what we do. Mm-hmm. So that's been a big part of our growth. Wow. So the 5 pillars, as I described them, are, number 1 would be support from family and friends. Not everybody has this. Not every family's, well adjusted and helps people work through. But if you have that, it's a big plus. And people that have lost a kid or had a kid pass, they want to talk about the kid. Other people will try and, skirt around the issue or not talk about the child that passed. But, they need to understand that the bereaved person wants to. So the first pillar is hopefully a supportive family and friends. Pillar 2 is building relationships and getting to know people who have been through the same thing you have, because they understand where you're coming from and you can communicate it on a different level. That's very healing, and that's something we provide, because obviously we have meetings and people meet each other. And the conference is an extraordinary event for that, because Helping Parents Heal in itself has the majority of the membership is women. But when we have the conference, the women bring their husbands, and the husbands are exposed to this, and it changes their lives. It's really remarkable. The third pillar is service. Now, not everyone initially after a loss is going to be able to provide service to someone else, but it is something that if you give, I think it comes back to you and it helps you heal. That could be working in a soup kitchen. It could be working for a foundation, a nonprofit. Could be starting a chapter of this, or starting something for organ donation, whatever, just service of some sort. Give, and it comes back. The fourth pillar is letting go of feelings of guilt. Most people, especially parents, want to blame themselves and say, I could have done this, I could have done that, I should have known, I should have seen the signs. But in the majority of cases, that's not the case. There's nothing you could do. You have to let that go, because it's just holding you back. Likewise, harboring anger and not forgiving someone else you hold responsible for that death in some way, whether it be due to like a doctor or an accident, someone in a vehicle that was driving another car or whatever. If you hold on and don't want to forgive or won't refuse to forgive, it's just hurting you. So it's getting to a point where you can forgive. I'm not saying it's easy, but that will help you. And then the fifth pillar is really the openness to considering evidence for the afterlife, and the idea that consciousness and the soul continue on after physical death. And that comes from a variety of methods. Mediumship is what I talk about, but you have near-death experience phenomena. There's tons of books on that. Mm-hmm. After-death communications, like the Guggenheim book, Hello from Heaven, touches on those. My wife had one of those that I'll talk about next time I'm on. Mm-hmm. And there's the reincarnation research that the University of Virginia did through Ian Stevenson and now Jim Tucker these days, that's highly compelling. And the mediumship research that I touch on in my book, and there are others. So if you look at that whole mosaic formed by all those, the evidence is very compelling, especially if you put all those together. So that last piece I call the hope piece. That's the hope pillar, and it really kind of can help push a lot of people over the top. And those are the 5 pillars. I'm not saying that's in lieu of therapy or anything else. Those are the 5 main things I've observed, though.
Yeah, well, and they are pretty common, it makes a lot of sense. Let me see, we've got 4 minutes. And I was going to try to get into reincarnation, but I think we'll have to save that for the next time.
We'll need some material for that one anyhow.
Okay. Well, forewarned, right? Be forearmed. But we do have enough time for you to give out your website information so people can find out more about you and your books, your newsletter, your events, contact information, all that good stuff.
Sure. It's markirelandauthor.com. It's Mark with a K, Ireland like the country, and the word author, markirelandauthor.com. And there you'll find pretty much everything I've talked about. So even the videos of my dad, I have a link to that there. I have a link to the Helping Parents Heal website. I have a Heal to the Medium certification program. I've got the books are all there in detail. There's links to places that you can buy them. All the Amazon sites, 11 of them in different countries, Barnes & Noble and others. I've got a media page with other interviews I've done. There's a documentary on my story that was done by some Arizona State University students at the School of Concrete School of Journalism. That was done about 10 years ago. It's a nice piece. I've got when I was at the University of Arizona and participated in a research study there was a Discovery Channel piece on that. You can see that as well. So I got a lot of stuff there. It's all at markirelandauthor.com.
And the newsletter comes out every so often, regularly? Or you're like me, I'm supposed to blog and I don't do it all the time.
When I first started, I was very consistent in doing it on a monthly basis, but I just don't have the time now. I try and do either one per quarter or every time I have a special announcement, then I'll do one. Or if I have some piece of information, I'll do that. But I would just say people will probably see 3 to 6 per year on average. So I'm not going to beat them to death with it.
Oh, you've got me beat. Shame on me. So yeah. Well, it's this fascinating topic, and like I said, we didn't get into the book. I mean, a lot, and so I think it's a worthwhile book for anybody that's either skeptical but open-minded, or not skeptical but open-minded. People always worry, about the unknown, and if the soul lives on, and this is pretty good evidence that it does.
Yeah. Well, and in a way, I'm happy we didn't get into the book that much, because then when people read it, it'll be fresh. A lot of what I shared came from my earlier experience. Those are detailed more in the first book, Soul Shift. I touched a little bit on the content of the second one, but that'll just give us that much more to talk about next time.
Yeah, and I'll try to figure out how to stretch an hour, Maybe we need to get some information from the other side how to do it. They know more than we do anyway.
I'll just talk faster.
Well, okay, that too. And I won't talk at all. No, but anyway, thank you for being here. Like I said, I enjoyed the book, and I'm anxious to hear about the other one. And so thank you for being here.
Sure, Marla. And just one favor to ask people, anyone who does get the book and read it, if you please put a review up, I'd really appreciate that, especially Amazon, Barnes & Noble as well. Yeah. But those are hard to get. So thank you much.
Good. And let's thank everybody for listening in as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more fun. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2009.
You have been listening to the Para X Radio Network.